This is how you grow. Project Mass is an advanced training, nutrition, and supplement program designed to add maximum size.
One of the key things to understand about myself and all the guys in this lab is that we're not just scientists, we're users. We live, eat, and breathe training, resistance training, and bodybuilding. And so one thing that we know and you know is that there are certain tried and true techniques that go all the way back to the golden age of bodybuilding that we know work. But to this point, no one ever really took the time to study them in a laboratory setting. That's what our lab does. We study why they work, but we also study how do we optimize them. You can't just say a training technique works and use it every single day. That's just not going to cut it. You got to actually program it into your split scientifically. So that's what we emphasize in this lab, along with studying brand new cutting edge techniques that we're going to give you in this program. So again, what you're going to get is a combination of the traditional tried and true methods, but how to optimize them using science, as well as new cutting edge techniques within this 14-week Mass project. So how do we develop this Project Mass training protocol? I'll tell you what, years and years of study. And then we're putting it all together for you in this 14-week program so that you can optimize skeletal muscle mass in as lean a way as possible. So what I'm going to be covering in this video is periodization, exactly what your training schedule will be throughout this program, acute training variables, which are variables that you manipulate during an actual training day, and then finally, cardio to optimize skeletal muscle mass and size. When you look at a massive bodybuilder, most people believe that they made gains linearly. That is, from here all the way to here throughout their career. A little bit of muscle every single day for years. But in reality, what research from Hackinen's lab has shown is that we make large gains and then we plateau maybe as long as a year. Then maybe you watch a bodybuilding.com trainer and you make more gains. And then you plateau for several months. What is it that causes the plateau and what causes us to break the plateau? Well, simply put, it's variation. What this program is going to do is show you scientifically how to incorporate variation so that we avoid the plateau. And the science of variation is known as periodization. And that's what we're going to use in this program so that you never stop growing. So in order to understand why we plateau, we first need to understand how the human body adapts. And one of the best scientists of all time, Hans Selye, developed a model called the General Adaptation Syndrome. The General Adaptation Syndrome says that we go through 3 stages of adaptation. The first is we have our initial fitness or our initial muscle mass. We go into the gym, we train, and say at the beginning of your training you can bench press 315 for 10 reps. After doing 6 sets of bench press, at the end of your training session you might only be able to lift 315 for 4 reps. That is called the alarm reaction phase. So at first performance goes down in the alarm reaction phase. Now your body's like, oh, I'm broken down, what do? I have to adapt. So it goes to what we call the stage of resistance. And that resistance, your body will adapt specific to the demands you place on it. In this program, the demands we will be placing on the body optimize skeletal muscle hypertrophy stage of resistance. And during this stage, you'll go up and up and up in a phase that we call supercompensation. In essence, you're gaining muscle. If you don't change your training up, if you keep doing what you're doing, which is what we call linear training, you will hit a plateau. Or if you don't rest enough or recover enough, you will also hit a plateau. Hans Selye called this the stage of exhaustion. So it can be caused by improper rest and improper variation. If you continue to not change it up and you don't recover well, you won't just plateau, you'll actually go backward. You'll what we call overreach and eventually overtrain. How do we avoid the plateau? One, we want to keep moving back and forth between the alarm reaction phase and the stage of resistance. And to do that, we need variation and programmed rest. So variation and programmed rest are key, and that's what this program is going to scientifically bring you. So there are 2 types of periodization. The first is traditional, and this was developed several decades ago, in which you vary your training every couple months. However, what we found in the lab is that traditional periodization works really well for novices and kind of trained people. But when you get to advanced, you need to vary your training much more frequently, every week and even every day. That type of periodization is called non-traditional periodization, and since it works best for advanced athletes, as shown by individuals such as Dr. Matt Ray's lab, we're going to use that in this 14-week trainer. There's several points in time where variation occurs in a periodized model. The first starts at the training day, which will be defined by the acute training variable discussed later. Second occurs, what do you do during your training split during the week? And that is called a microcycle. It can last anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks. How does that week fit into a month? The variation within a month to maybe 2 months is called a mesocycle. And how do several months fit within a year, or 6 months even? That is what's known as a macrocycle. We're going to be periodizing in this program primarily at the mesocycle level. And in fact, we'll have 3 mesocycles, which each last anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks in length. For the first mesocycle on week 1, you're going to start off with the primary goal of lifting heavier weights. That means on your hypertrophy days, you're going to be resting longer, as well as keeping your reps a little bit lower, like towards the 8 to 10 repetition range. And on the heavy days, you'll be lifting heavy, but resting 3 to 5 minutes. The goal here is to be able to train your nervous system to recruit more muscle fibers. And the point of this is to have very high quality, very heavy workouts. When you move on to week 2, we're gonna start to bump it into gear. We're gonna start to move it into more of the fun stuff where you focus on hypertrophy. Repetitions are gonna go up this week. You're gonna increase your training volume, and you're gonna decrease your rest period quite substantially. Week 3, that's where the grind begins. You're gonna get in there and you're gonna roll up your sleeves, and I'm gonna tell you this, you're gonna wonder whether you can survive that week 3, because we're gonna introduce a lot of shocking methods, a lot of advanced training variables. By the end of the week, you're gonna be, man, can I make it through this? And that's where we bring you to week 4, where we back off, we cut the volume in half, and we allow you to recover. That's where the program rest comes into play. So during the first 4 weeks, you'll vary based on the actual repetition range and the rest period length and the shocking method. When we move to the next mesocycle, we're gonna vary by changing the exercises, but following the same order. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4 being the recovery week. By the time you get to the third phase, you're gonna extend the time zone from 4 to 6 weeks. Again, you'll start off week 1 heavy, week 2 traditional hypertrophy, but instead of only doing one overreaching phase, which is week 3, where you have extreme shocking methods and high volume, you're gonna have 2 weeks straight. So this is what the program's all about. So you're gonna go week 3 and 4 extreme training, and since you went harder for longer, we're gonna give you 2 weeks to recover, and that will define the end of the program, where you can actually realize how big and how much mass and strength you've actually gained. While you're gonna make a lot of gains the next 14 weeks, the key thing I wanna hammer home is that the training techniques and periodization principles that we're giving you here today, you can use to program your training from here on out. So now that you understand the structure of this 14-week program, I'm gonna break down the 3 types of workout variations that you're gonna be using throughout the 14 weeks and why. All athletes should periodize, because all athletes are trying to avoid plateaus. If you take your traditional athlete, say a track athlete or a hockey player or a football player, those athletes, while body composition is important, require things like speed and power. For the bodybuilder, the majority of the focus was going to be on skeletal muscle mass and things like symmetry and proportion. On this program, we're not going to be worried about speed or power. Instead, we're going to focus on 3 primary workout variations. These include strength, hypertrophy, and hypertrophy shock. So what's a strength workout look like? 1, you're going to be lifting extremely heavy in a 1 to 5 repetition range. And then secondly, you're going to have very long rest period lengths, like 3 to 5, so you can optimally recover and lift as heavy as you can on each set. The reason why you use strength training, so you cause a lot of tension on the muscle, which causes damage and muscle growth, and so you can lift heavier in a hypertrophy range, ultimately leading to a greater training stimulus. The second type of workout is a hypertrophy workout. So what's hypertrophy? It's skeletal muscle growth. And there are 4 ways that a muscle grows. The first is mechanical stress or tension, and that was addressed for strength training. The second is metabolic stress. That's when you build up a lot of lactate in the muscle that triggers growth. The third is cell swelling. You know, when you get that pump, that actually triggers your body to actually increase the size of the cell. And the fourth is recruitment of your large, fast twitch muscle fibers. Actually calling those into play leads to growth. Hypertrophy training involves lifting in an 8 to 12 repetition range with shorter rest periods. So this time you're resting from 60 to 120 seconds. That maximizes 3 of the mechanisms responsible for growth. That includes metabolic stress and cell swelling, and you also get a lot of muscle fiber recruitment of the fast twitch fibers. Because this type of training emphasizes or targets the most mechanisms of hypertrophy, we call it hypertrophy training. The third and final method that we'll be using is hypertrophy shock training. What hypertrophy shock training does is emphasize at least one of the 4 mechanisms of hypertrophy. So if we go back to hypertrophy training, we know that you have short rest period lengths like 60 to 120 seconds rest, and you're training in an 8 to 12 repetition range. That's going to build up a lot of lactate and metabolic stress, for example. But at hypertrophy shock, we're going to take that to a new level. So for example, instead of resting 60 to 120 seconds rest, you might actually perform a drop set, where instead of stopping, you lower the weight and keep going. That's going to emphasize cell swelling and metabolic stress. And we're going to be throwing a number of these shocking methods at you throughout the program. So for your training splits during each week of this program, you're going to be using a legs push-pull split. So what this means is that the first half of the week, for the first 3 days, you'll start off with strength. This is when you're fresh and you need your nervous system to be fresh to lift heavy. You'll start off lifting in that 1 to 5 repetition range in long rest periods. On day 1, you'll do legs. On day 2, you'll do all pushing movements. And on day 3, you'll do all pulling movements. This will be followed up by a day off. And then once you're recovered, you're gonna go into hypertrophy for 3 days. Legs again, push, and then pull, and then another day off. Now, optionally, on both of those days off is when you would program in your cardio. So now that you know what your training split actually is, before you start day 1 of this program, you also need to watch the program overview, the nutrition overview, and the supplementation overview.